Welcome to our City Council study session for July.
Recording in progress.
We have a full agenda today, so we are going to get started right away, and I'll turn it over to our City Administrator, Allison Zelms, to start us off.
Thank you, Council President, Council members. As Jess Schuler is coming forward, I did want to introduce her. I know you've met before, but Jess is our management analyst in administration. And I did want to just start off by thanking her for continuing to actually deliver on one of these action plan items of continuous improvement and high performance organization. You'll see in the packet that she's continued to refine and clarify in a easier to understand fashion the accomplishments to date and where we stand on the action plan that supports your strategic priorities. So with that, I will turn it over to Jessica Schuler.
Welcome.
Mentioned, I'll be providing an action plan update today. And a little overview of the presentation. I'll be giving a brief overview of the action plan, going over some highlights from the mid-year update, and then also outlining what we can expect over the next year or so. So jumping right on in. What is the action plan? The action plan is our roadmap for success. It outlines current initiatives aimed at advancing City Council's strategic priorities. Some key benefits of the action plan is that it establishes a shared vision, enhances communication and collaboration, and promotes accountability and transparency. Looking back at the history of the action plan, it was initially adopted. Our first ever citywide action plan was adopted in December 2021 by City Council. We were doing quarterly updates. There are some gaps in there with the updates just between changes in positions and teammate leaves and things of that nature. And then the item that we have highlighted today is our current update and a little sneak preview at Q1 of 2025 and what we'll be touching on later on in the presentation. So a couple updates since you last have seen the action plan. There's been quite a bit of refinement of what's included in the action plan. Previously, the action plan was about 650 rows. So that's been consolidated to about 107, which is a lot easier to sift through and look through and keep updated. And in doing that refinement, there were a lot of operational items that have been moved aside and moved into an operations plan, and really focusing the action plan on items that are either increasing the scope or impact of our services and advancing that in advancing City Council's strategic priorities. With the update frequency, we shifted from quarterly updates to every 6 months to enhance tracking and things of that nature. We've also developed some charts that you'll see later on in this presentation. And again, just enhancing measurement and transparency for data-driven decision making. Looking at a couple items that are under development, I'll be working with departments to establish citywide key performance indicators with the purpose of understanding the overall effectiveness of the action plan and making sure that they're aligning us with strategic priorities. And again, that operations plan, we're consolidating all of those operations type items and putting them into their own plan. And with that operations plan, it'll be about 6 to 8 6 to 8 metrics for each department. And again, just helping us understand the overall health of our departments. So this slide should look familiar. So it outlines our strategic priorities. And as a reminder, with each strategic priority, that City Council has selected a top goal for each strategic priority. So for example, the affordable living strategic priority, the top goal selected was construct market rate and affordable owner occupied housing. So we'll be in the updates section, we'll be giving an update for each of those top goals. So this is one of those charts that I mentioned. So it shows us at a glance the entire action plan. It shows us that for the 107 items, that about 8% are complete, 11 items, 87 are on target, 8 are delayed, and 1 is off target. Then we also have this breakdown by department, which is to help city leadership in decision-making. And a few things to note on this slide is that none of this work happens in silos, that just because, you know, there's maybe more in some columns, there's a lot of departments behind those, and just for efficiency purposes, there's only one row for each initiative. So there might be more in one column, and just based on whether departments more operations based versus action plan based, that can also impact that as well. A few other items to call out. Public music doesn't currently have any items. However, I am working with their department to help establish those for the next update. And then the library has the one item that is behind, that is off target currently, and that has just to do with the availability of digital and physical materials within their collections. And I'm also working with them as well to see how we can troubleshoot that and define better metrics. So action plan highlights. So a lot of great activity happening in the affordable living space between the Home Ownership Creation Program and the Coalition of Rochester Area Housing. About 196 new housing units created. 2 incentives were revised to promote owner-occupied housing, and City Council recently authorized development assistance for the Sherman on Civic Center. So again, a lot of great activity happening within this space. Also, a lot of great investments in the public realm, a lot of revitalization happening with the Discovery Walk project, the Riverfront project, the park referendum in particular, Soldiers Field and Cook Park. So again, a lot of great things happening in this space. And then the last top goal is the RPU 2030 power supply needs. So they recently in February shared details of the power supply resource plan with the RPU board. And then the long range financial impacts and forecasts will be shared at a July 2024 meeting. So with that, the RPU's path for that project remains relatively on course with what you've heard in previous meetings. Again, net 100% renewable energy in 2030. And again, a lot of those other bullet points are similar to the last update. Other key highlights. So there's been a new reasonable accommodation process and grievance procedure to the website. The 311 team is fully staffed and nearing implementation with full rollout within the year. That'll be piloted with the community development and public works departments. And then the next department will be the city clerk's office. There's also the accreditation for the National Recreation and Parks Association by the Parks Department, a great achievement. And preparations are underway. They have to renew that certification every 5 years. And so there are conversations about how to keep that certification. RPU funding, they've implemented new strategies with grant applications. They got $110,000 secured for the pollinator project. They're waiting decisions on 2 additional grants. And again, to speak to that collaboration, they're working on drafting another application with the community development department. So moving forward, what's next? So in the coming weeks, I'll be getting the report posted on the website, put in the council update. The next action plan update will be in January 2025 and will feature that new operations plan, which outlines those citywide key performance metrics. In Q1 2025, it will also be the strategic planning process that will include selecting those strategic priorities, making sure that those are still moving us forward with the community. And after those strategic priorities are selected, those citywide key performance indicators, I'll be working with departments to get those established to enhance measurement and communication. So some example metrics would be the National Community Survey or the Employee Engagement Survey. Again, those will be selected based on the strategic priorities. Just a timeline here, visualization of what we can expect and how this aligns with the budget process. So again, January is when that 2024 year-end action plan update and operations plan update can be expected. The strategic priorities realignment in February and March, and then the budget process following shortly thereafter. And then this slide should also look familiar. That this is just to say that the alignment process is an ongoing thing as the comprehensive plan is updated, as the DMC development plan is updated, and the strategic priorities are updated. The action plan is continually updated as well. So that covers the action plan update. Any questions?
I'll start us off. Thanks. First of all, thanks, Jessica. I know you have done a ton of work to make this really a functional tool across the city. So that is just wonderful. So thank you. How have you gotten a sense from different staff across the city that this is a useful tool and they are sticking with sort of tracking how they're moving through their work plan and metrics and everything to stay on task? Or have you just gotten broader feedback and are you continuing to incorporate that into the process and format?
Thank you, President Carlson, for the question. I will say that when I inherited the process, that there was a lot of feedback, that it was a lot of information that they were updating on, and the feedback that I've gotten in the consolidation and refinement process is that people found that the exercise was helpful and that the consolidated number of efforts and items that they had in there was helpful in kind of keeping those things front of mind.
Okay, good. So people are staying on top of it and meeting the requirements or requests for reporting.
Yes.
I was just going to ask one more question of Councilmember Keen, or if you're able to answer it, just from the RPU goal in general, was there anything else from your reflection that needs to be shared with the council?
No, I don't think so, President Carlson. I think the RPU team plans to be here in the next 2 months, I think, with an update on the power generation plan.
Okay.
So I think they're comfortable with this process.
Okay. Did you have a question or comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, kind of a follow-up there too. Just that idea of like, I did feel that there was this new scoping. I'm trying to remember how this originally came about. I really like the way it's integrated with the overall strategic priorities, but I guess I'm still looking to say, is this something that, and Michelle, you're running this individual program, but from the upper management, is this like a good way to keep track of things, or is this an overhead? Is this fitting well into our normal operations, or is it just a thing we do above and beyond that really doesn't tie in with our normal work?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. Is it
Yep.
helpful for staff, but also for administration? Go ahead, Ms. Elms.
Council President, Councilmember Keen, I guess I could share, I think it's really valuable, but we're still sort of, I mean, in all intents and purposes, in the infancy of doing this as a city, if we think about all across all of the departments. And so really, I think it was critical and really great work that Jess did to do that refinement, because you might recall that when you've seen this, it was like 35 pages. That's overwhelming for anyone, and it doesn't necessarily tell you anything. And so being able to refine it and really make it about having the action plan align with the strategic priorities. And of course, there are things that we need to continuously improve on day to day in our operations that maybe have some connection, but are things that we would do regardless of, what the strategic priorities are, because our departments are continuously trying to make sure that they're providing the best level of service possible for the resources available. I think as we continue to also improve our budget process and have hopefully some amount of consistency in our department head leadership, we've seen a lot of turnover with retirements, et cetera, that we'll see how this all comes together and really helps to provide more stability as we see that progress, so that we understand how we're methodically moving towards achieving the goals. And one good example of that, I think, was the updated operations plan from the fire department that actually really took a lot of what was here and applied it to how they're thinking about their operation, and not having them be separate, but have them be aligned.
Great.
Of course, that's from my perspective. I don't know if there's a department head or a deputy that would have a different perspective.
Okay, well, again, I appreciate the idea of that the staff was rescoping, but I really like the idea that this is in 2025, when we go through our strategic priorities, if there are changes, that this is integrated in with that. This is an observation and maybe it's a question, but I still feel like these action plans are very project oriented and they skim away from the operations of running a city of 120,000 people, street sweeping, snow clearing. We don't have not so much action plans, but metrics that say we're hitting our goals here or we're not. Is that beyond the scope of an action plan tracking, or is that I'm looking for something that's very different?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Keen. With the operations plan, I think that will hit more in those metric space. They still might be a little bit higher level, and then also with the citywide key performance indicators, that those numbers will help us kind of understand from a numbers-based perspective how we're doing as an organization.
Okay, because I do appreciate the action plan and the idea that these major initiatives, and that we do have some key performance metrics around that. But I still think, and that it's probably the nature of a council versus the management of the operations. But I feel like in my work here, I don't get the visibility to the operations of the city that I would like to have for doing my job. Thanks.
Councilmember Wall?
Thank you. Thank you. We made note of it this last Monday night, a week ago, and the update for Goal 1, also noting that there was a great op-ed Saturday in the Post Bulletin commending the city for all the work that is being done in the way of housing creation. So to see that show up in this kind of tool is very hopeful and helpful for the council. Thank you.
No comments, questions? All right, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll move on to our next topic. Administrator Zelms, go ahead.
Thank you, Council President. Our next topic is, I guess, maybe a surprise action plan that we received from the legislature. So we have Christiane Cartwright, Deputy City Clerk. He will be providing an update for you on some, hopefully some options and some perspective about how, as we continue to move forward, still without a lot of regulatory framework from the state, I would argue, what might be the pathway for us to continue to be prepared for the Office of Cannabis Management starting to provide locations with the ability to operate cannabis operations, and some different pros, cons, and impacts to the city, depending on some of the feedback that we get this evening or this afternoon. So with that, I would turn it over to Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Administrator Zelms, council members, Council President Carlson. So today we're talking about cannabis registration. And in particular, we are discussing what are the options for the city of Rochester from a regulatory standpoint. So if I could cast our minds back a little bit in a couple of seconds, but when we look at our actual strategic priorities, should we do a regulatory framework? Some of the things that we would be doing in terms of those strategic priorities is guiding new business license types through what is frankly a very convoluted process. We'd also be partnering with an emerging market. We'd be guiding them through this new market and creating a framework for entry into that market within Rochester. One of the things that is still hazy is how that would affect our affordable living within the city of Rochester. And so I think there will be research that has to be considered about what it looks like with increasing amounts of cannabis businesses within the city, what it looks like after the deschedulization of cannabis at the federal level, and how that might impact housing within the city, but that is research yet to come. So back in 2023, the state legislature passed Chapter 342, and it legalized cannabis within the state of Minnesota. And what it also did is it created a centralized body, the Office of Cannabis Management, to oversee the process of this legalization. And so the Office of Cannabis Management is responsible for the licensing, the inspection, and the regulation of cannabis and hemp businesses. They are the centralized body, and they are the final say on licensing within the state of Minnesota. So that process has been tiered. So the first step that happened was the allowance of consumption being legalized back in the summer of last year. And then the next step that's begun is manufacturing and cultivation, which has started with the Office of Cannabis Management taking in applicants at the start of this summer. What is coming upon the horizon is retail registration, retail licensing, which is likely to go into effect this fall into early 2025, which is why I'm coming to you, because the city of Rochester has a responsibility when it comes to retail registration in terms of clarifying, determining, and defining what it is that we want to allow and how we want to allow it within the parameters of our jurisdiction. So some cannabis license types, just to get a little bit of clarity about what we're dealing with here. There are 16 different types of cannabis licensing. For us, retail licensing is really going to be our bread and butter today, and that's what we're going to talk about. But just a little bit of quick background. You have, if I were to go from seed to home, you have the cultivators, which are responsible for the growth of the cannabis plant. From there, you also have manufacturers who work with those seedlings to create an actual cannabis product, whether that is your typical plant product or whether that is edibles. Speaking of edibles, what currently exists are the lower potency hemp edibles. If we can cast our mind back even a little bit further, I believe it was 2022, when the legislature basically passed another bill that allowed for THC and stronger edibles to be consumed. That's what we're talking about when we say the lower potency hemp edibles. So if you've seen any of the THC shops that are littered across the state, littered across the city, those are the lower potency hemp edibles that are discussed here. Under the new Office of Cannabis Management, under Chapter 342A, they all now need to register with a centralized agency falling under that jurisdiction, falling under that enforcement mechanism. Wholesalers then are, well, they're wholesalers. They are basically a depository for a large amount of product, and then they are used to sell to other businesses directly. Which brings us obviously to how do those products get to those businesses? Through one of these various ways. Transporters, which are basically business-to-business transport systems, or delivery services, which is an interesting variable, but what it is it is from retailers actually direct to consumer. What already existed, but now has also been codified, medical cannabis and testing facilities, which, well, the testing facilities basically make sure that the cannabis products are safe, edible, up to what is the regulatory standard, and good for public consumption and use. This now brings us to the type of retail businesses that the city would be responsible for. Here we have micro and meso businesses. They are in a unique space, and if I could create a comparison, I would use breweries for liquor in a similar way. What they are a hybrid business system. They grow, they cultivate, and they also sell. And so that particular license type typically has larger square footage. It has more plant greenery, but it also has a retail business front, which allows for consumers and individuals to come into that space and buy product as an end user. We then also have your standard retailer, which is just your typical commercial storefront, which allows for the sale of cannabis products. And then finally, event organizers, which just basically create temporary cannabis events. So with all of that background, we now come to ourselves and local control and what that looks like. Last year, almost exactly 1 year, the Office of the City Clerk was before you, and we passed a moratorium on the sale of cannabis products until January of 2025. When we were before you, when we had public hearings, when we were discussing this particular process, part of the feedback that we got from the general public was that there was more work to be done, that there was more information that needed to be considered, whether or not the council wanted to have more businesses or less, and to essentially come back to this body with more information, a more measured policy, and to give all of you options about how to proceed into 2025. Things have changed since then. At the start of this year, they amended Chapter 342. The Office of Cannabis Management slightly changed the process for social equity applicants. Other information has come forth, and we are now moving forward full steam ahead towards retail licensing and towards those licenses becoming issued from the Office of Cannabis Management and coming to our doorstep, asking us for a process so that they can open their doors next year. So what I really want to focus upon is, as a municipality, as a local entity, our control is very limited. The creation of the Office of Cannabis Management has meant that almost all control about licensure is vested within the state. There are some things that we can control, primarily from a zoning perspective, primarily from a numbers perspective, and primarily from, on the margins, some ordinance perspectives, such as things about hours. But for the most part, all of the actual vetting, all of the actual inspections, all of the actual decisions about licensure will be made by the Office of Cannabis Management. What we cannot do as a municipality is say no to every single license. We are bound by state law to have at least one license per every 12,500 residents, which gives us about 10 licenses within the city of Rochester. There's no threshold for a maximum. One thing that I would want to point out is that the state office, the Office of Cannabis Management, has made a statewide license cap of 150 licenses for the entirety of the state of Minnesota until about 2026. However, one license does not always equal one business. You could have a license and you could still apply for 3 different businesses under that license per county or 1 per municipality. So you can have up to 4. So what are the policy considerations that I asked for today? The Office of the City Clerk is looking for guidance about what the City Council as a policy-making body would like to move forward with in regards to registration and the amount of licenses within the City of Rochester. A thing that I want to point your attention to on these slides is the parcels that allow for licensure within the city. So under the UDC, we created a framework that basically said that parcels that are about 1,000 feet from a school or 500 feet from a public park or similar use would be allowable for cannabis businesses, cannabis retail. What that's given us is about 800 parcels, which you can see up in the maps, kind of scattered throughout the city. A parcel is not necessarily just one space. It's obviously could be a multitude of spaces. They could all end up being clustered. When we make a decision, when you make a decision today, those 810 parcels all become in play. And so if you land on a number, any number, the point of control, so to speak, ends once a decision of a number has been made. At that point, if they pass zoning regulations, they are allowed to have a business. So if we say 5 today, well, if we say 10 today, if we say 100 today, from that point, as long as they are anywhere within those blue zones, they are applicable. They can have a license. They can have a registration within the city of Rochester. So here are some potential scenarios that I'm going to outline and the advantages and the disadvantages of each of those scenarios. We'll start off with the minimum and then I will go up to a potential maximum. As you look through those slides, I'd like to draw your attention to some of these color codes. And what they are basically the general advantages of each of these things and the different disadvantages. And what you will see as we move across the slides is that they will move, that cost will move, decision-making will move, illicit operations will move as we stem basically the full gamut of the different options. So 10 cannabis businesses. First and foremost, the primary advantage is cost. At 10 businesses, Olmsted County has offered to do the entirety of registration. The city of Rochester can be hands-off on pretty much the entire registration process, which means that from the enforcement mechanisms, from the inspection mechanisms, from the general mechanisms that come into play with any form of regulatory work, we would not be involved with all the costs associated with that. A thing that I also want to mention is that with retail businesses, there is a state mandated requirement that they are inspected annually. And so that is not something that we would be able to avoid. It is a requirement if you do registration that you inspect these businesses annually. Additionally, because the state is registering those lower potency hemp businesses, we would also be responsible for those businesses as well in our registration. And so I want to put in the back of your minds that the number is not going to be 10. It's going to be 90, it's going to be 100, it's going to be 110, depending upon what the final number is once we get full clarity on how many hemp businesses are actually within the city of Rochester. I say final clarity because we still don't know. Those businesses are still registering with the Office of Cannabis Management. As of today, they have about a 45% registration rate, and they are continuing to go into those businesses. And so until we get a final number, that number is in flux. Another advantage is that it allows us to be elastic over time. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Once we go over 10, once we go over 15, et cetera, that's how many businesses we are allowing for registration. By starting at the minimum, we give ourselves space and room to grow, to monitor the process, to monitor the market, and to see if there's a demand. And if there is a demand, to then respond to that demand, to respond to requests for more businesses. In the neutral category is obviously, it's neither here nor there. As the largest hub in Southeast Minnesota, we are not taking a leadership position by going with the lowest amount. We are not being bold. We are not setting the tone. We are not being the municipality that is going to have a large amount of retail businesses. And so we are not going to be primarily at the table, possibly, when the Office of Cannabis Management comes and gets input, because we don't have a large slice of the licensing pie. There is also, and this is both an advantage and slightly neutral, there's a clarity of our decision-making process. We are following state statute, full stop. There's no gray area about that. We have followed state statute. It is clear what has led us to that numeric decision, and there can be no major challenge to why we landed on that number. From the disadvantaged slot, we're at the minimum number. What that means is that there's 10 businesses, they have a larger share of the respective market. Additionally, there's 10 legal businesses, 10 legal avenues for work for cannabis. That leaves a market for the illicit industry. If people cannot get a retail license, then there's a real possibility that they just sell cannabis products and undermine the market anyway. 14. The advantages and the disadvantages are fairly similar at 14. We retain the opportunity to partner with Olmsted County Public Health to have that cost differential be kept low. We retain the ability to still have a little bit of elasticity, to still grow further. But the disadvantages also remain the same. There's still a large market share that is controlled by a small amount of businesses. And additionally, 14 gets to the county level in terms of us being able to say clarity of decision-making, but we are now at the upper cusp of the county level. And there is the real likelihood and possibility that other municipalities, if we land on 14, may see if they could elect not to do any, because we would possibly take every license within Olmsted County. 16. So 16, we've now become leaders in Southeast Minnesota. We are now registering multiple businesses. It's a smaller market share for those businesses. We are leading the region, and we are also now in charge of registration, which means we have total regulatory control with all of the advantages and the disadvantages therein. It also has a cost that is going to be associated with it, which I will get to a little bit later in my slides. 20 is 16, but more. Again, we have regulatory control. We have a clear clarity of decision-making in the sense that we have a lot of businesses that we are now allowing within the city of Rochester. We would be one of the more permissive cities thus far in terms of allowing more licenses than less. We would likely somewhat neuter some level of the illicit activity because we would be offering a large amount of cannabis businesses to operate within the city. And it would be closer to a perfect competition market where no one business has a large share of the market. It's really a bunch of identical businesses doing operations, and may the best product win. The major disadvantage of this, however, is again, we would be doing all of the registration, all of the enforcement, all of the inspections, and we would have to eat that cost. So the local approval process, just to really iron out what that looks like. A licensee first applies to the Office of Cannabis Management. The Office of Cannabis Management vets that licensee, runs a background check, does all of the preliminary work. If that licensee is successful, the Office of the Cannabis Management then gives them a pre-approval of their licensure. That licensee then would come to the city of Rochester, if that's where they want to go, and would ask us if they could register. Should we have space, should we have the numbers for that registration to go through, we would then look at the zoning, we would look at where they want to go. And if they are within those blue spectrums of the map, then we would likely say yes. We would run maybe some of our own checks, but for the most part, we would be perfunctory in the overall process. Where we would come into play if we were doing registration is that we would have additional authority to suspend businesses. We would have additional authority to do inspections of businesses. We would have additional authority to really be responsive to complaints about retail businesses. But in terms of a general approval process, once they've been approved at the state level and once their zoning is complete, Office of Cannabis Management would do all of the major inspections initially, and then we would have an obligation to give them a registration. The final point on that I want to make is if those businesses come to the city, we have 30 days to make a decision. If we do not make a decision, whether that is denying or approving, the Office of Cannabis Management treats that as a de facto approval, and they are issued a license within our jurisdiction. Please. So this is what the cost of registration would be for the businesses. So initially for the registration, it's about $500. So if there was one business, we would get $500 from that one business. And then as you can see, kind of self-evidently on the graph above, on the table above, each of those different numbers at the price points kind of shows you how much revenue we would bring in just from the fees of the businesses alone, not talking or taking into account any tax revenue, because that still remains very porous, very gray, and we don't know what that will look like, and we won't for several years yet. If we register again, what that registration means is that we have to do age verification checks. We have to make sure that these businesses are not selling to anyone that's under 21. We have to make sure that their packaging is up to code. We have to make sure that they aren't doing things that could be enticing to children. We have to do all of those at this current level. There is possibly a world where that inspection process evolves, where the Office of Cannabis Management comes to us and requests our inspectors, should they exist at that time, to do more in terms of actual quality control, quality checks. That has not yet been fully fleshed out. At this time, the Office of the Cannabis Management intends to do all of the inspections, but it has been something that has been mentioned in conversations. And so I want to put that also on your radar as a possibility, should we choose to register. With that consideration, if we do 16, if we do 20 plus, for it to be successful, for it to be done properly, we would need an inspector, a full-time individual who would do all of the training, who would be there and go up to the Office of Cannabis Management, become well-versed in all of the regulatory processes, become well-versed in all of the laws and all the statements, and do all of that work. We would also need someone under the age of 21 to do the age verification checks. And we would need to hire that persons on multiple summers and multiple periods of time to make sure that we could actually run proper age verification checks. So the estimated cost for all of that is about $150,000. And that's kind of based off of the entry-level inspector rate with family benefits, and then just the general cost framework for an underage individual to be enticed to work, multiple underage individuals to be enticed to work continuously through seasonal employments. So the considerations again for this body, if we do 16 or more, then the ordinance crafting that the Office of the City Clerk and working in tandem with the City Attorney's Office has to make is much more comprehensive. We have to build out an ordinance that also considers all of the regulatory framework, that considers what the council wishes to go forward with, and is much more robust, much more responsive, and much more considering of what it means to register and be in control of cannabis. If we choose not to do that, if we choose to allow Olmsted County to take the lead on this, then the ordinance that our office would bring back before you would be much leaner. Bit of comparison. So right now, Bloomington is going to do 8 businesses. They are going off of the lowest amount possible based on that 12,500 number that I was talking about, and they are going to register them. St. Paul and Minneapolis are also going to do registration themselves, but they are going unlimited. So they are going above and beyond the 20 plus that I recommended. They are saying anyone that wants a registration within the parameters of those cities can get one. And finally, Lakeville is a little bit behind us, and they are still under discussion for both of those elements, which is and has been the case of multiple cities who are still trying to kind of figure this all out to untangle this ball of yarn. The Office of the City Clerk's recommendation is 14. Olmsted County has expressed a willingness and in fact a desire to do registration for cannabis. Based on the reasons and the advantages that were outlined in the previous slide, it is our recommendation that that 14 number strikes a pretty fine balance between leadership, going above and beyond the 10 minimum, while also retaining the cost benefit of not having to hire an additional inspector and to do a wait and see approach. Particularly compelling is that the Office of Cannabis Management itself has set itself up for success by limiting the statewide number to 150. They themselves are operating off of a framework of wait and see. Let's see how the market goes. Let's see what it looks like at this limited number and then revisit it. Additionally, as the governing body of a municipality, we can always come back. We can come back with more. What we cannot do is that once we do registration and we go above and beyond, go back to the county or reduce the number of businesses, because once they are here, they are here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristan. I have a few questions and comments, but I will turn it over to Councilmember Bransford.
Just out of curiosity, and this may be a stupid question, I don't know, but you know, THC laced water and the low potency gummies, does that so if I want to go to a restaurant and get a can of water that has THC in it, do they need to apply for one of these licenses, or is this really plant-based or stronger edible-based businesses?
It's mainly the stronger edible-based businesses, is my understanding.
Okay.
So those are registered in that separate category?
Of the low potency THC.
Yeah, the low potency.
And how many of those is it unlimited or how? So for the low potency, is it just we'll give as many licenses to restaurants and businesses, and or are those also capped?
Those are not capped, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Are those registered at all? I don't think they are.
Which the
Low potency.
No.
So, and the language here is bothering me that we're saying they'd go a different, there is no other process. You can
Well,
just,
that's why I asked the
No,
question.
that's what he said. There's 45% registered so far, but they're continuing their process to
yeah, again, just to clarify on the low potency, you're saying they are registered? I didn't think they were registered, nor is there a plan to register them.
They are being registered. So the lower potency edibles, hemp products that was outlined in the slide are currently being registered. So before, even before, I would say around the fall of last year is when they begun to get registered with the Office of Cannabis Management. Before that, there was no regulatory process for them. They were just opening throughout the state. Yep. So when the creation of the Office of Cannabis Management occurred, one of the things that was considered was how do we bring all of these businesses into compliance? And so what's happening right now, and this is kind of why it's all quite nebulous, is that they are voluntarily asking those businesses at this juncture to register. And that registration process for any business that's doing THC sales, low edible THC sales in particular, they were told to start registering by October of last year, and they've been continuing to register. Estimates from the Office of Cannabis Management is saying, we believe that we are only at about 45%. But as that office continues to get spun up, as that office continues to get inspectors, as that office continues to get resources, they're then going to now remove kind of the honey and bring out the vinegar and have actual inspectors go out, figure out who hasn't registered, do local compliance enforcement checks, et cetera, et cetera. Where we would come into that is if we are registering, we would be the best on the boots on the ground partner to say, within Rochester, we're seeing these amounts of businesses. These people need to come in, these people need to do registration. And so that's likely also going to be part of the partnership. But right now, that number is unknown.
And it's just happening retroactively. You got that?
I just want to add something real quick. Just because I feel like I hear this misunderstanding, council members, council president, council member Keen, that registration process for the low potency is not one and the same.
It's not counting
That
against these
registration
numbers.
is free.
Yep.
It's a form that they fill out
Right.
with the Office of Cannabis Management. It is a separate thing completely from what we're talking about here today.
That's what I was trying to clarify.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
But to clarify the clarification, it's true that we would not be charging them for that registration, but we would be part of the partnership for the verification, for the inspections, for the work of making sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do in terms of age verification checks. So when I say that our inspector would be doing that work, that is what they would be doing. They would be partnering with the Office of Cannabis Management on those lower hemp edibles as well, in terms of doing the age verification checks locally.
Okay, I'll ask my questions. First of all, what census is it based on? Number per
State demographer's office is what they would.
2023's community survey or 2020's census?
So it's not based off, so they're not using the census. Their recommendation is to use the Minnesota State Demographer's Office, which then provides us with pretty updated numbers, typically every year, to kind of get our number of like what we would use for population count.
Okay, so for the event organizations,
Mhm.
they would need, they would take away from the number of registrations we have, even if they were having just an event? What do you mean by that?
No, so think of cannabis really as like a hybrid of smoke and liquor.
Yep.
So for liquor licensing, we have what's called a temporary liquor license, which is for an organization within certain parameters. For liquor, it's a nonprofit organization
Yep.
that's been around for 3 years.
Sure.
To be able to get a temporary liquor license to do something every between 1 to 4 days. For cannabis, it would be something similar. And that particular framework hasn't been totally ironed out, but we would not, again, be the licensing body for that.
Okay,
That entity would go to the Office of Cannabis Management.
okay, so the only things we're talking about, right, or the only entities we're talking about are the micro, mezza, and retail?
Correct.
Okay. And then for those entities that have a license but have multiple businesses that are under that license,
Mhm.
would we be counting each of those individual businesses as separate registrants?
Yes,
Okay, so it doesn't matter that they only have one license and it covers all three. Each individual one still counts as one of our registrations.
right. So registration and licensing, I know, is kind of getting
I know.
intermingled here.
Yeah.
So think of it like licensing is exclusively for the state. We are responsible for registration. So when we say numbers, 14 is our registration number.
Right, so the license, if three businesses are registered or are licensed under one license,
Mhm.
each of those three businesses would still be required individual registration.
Correct.
Okay,
But then to clarify this, you can only have one per municipality anyway. So even if there is a business that's, let's say, licensed by the Office of Cannabis Management, and they're initially from Northfield, they can only come down to Rochester and register one of their retail businesses with Rochester. Now they can go and do others in Byron or Marion Township, because you can have up to 3 within a county. But for our purposes, it's always only going to be
Okay.
one registrant.
that is really confusing, but I get it. Okay, and then my last question to you or my colleagues is, are you getting a sense of what demand there is? Anybody hearing from interested retailers? Is your office getting a lot of calls?
Not yet.
Okay, so we're not hearing that there's just gonna be this massive scramble to get licenses and people are gonna be incredibly frustrated that we only had 14.
I cannot speak to that from our office's perspective, but you all may have heard something
I
different.
have not heard a lot.
My only comment would be, with our public hearings last fall, we did hear from,
We heard from a few, but
both sides that we should be a leader in this. We shouldn't be using government to constrain business, but we were also hearing that we shouldn't be in this. So I think we did hear that, but just in a public.
but
hearing.
again, hearing from both sides is still maybe an opportunity to find some middle space. Okay, all right, I have a few others who have raised their hand, so,
Answer your question.
oh yeah,
Are we
please.
hearing?
Yep.
So the Olmsted County Extension Office, the Master Gardeners in particular, are getting a lot of questions about help with how do you grow marijuana. So,
But that's individual growers.
right, so
It's
that's
totally
the only
separate.
thing I can speak to is there's a lot of demand coming in actually across the state, people reaching out to Master Gardeners for that.
Okay,
I don't know where that would go, but it's
That's-
happening.
all right. Ms. Elms?
I'll just maybe offer that one of those unknowns that Mr. Cartwright has touched on throughout the presentation is that if you are considering a business, you're likely looking at that licensure at the state first, because that's the first constraint point, and that is your entry point to then be able to get registrations in up to 3 locations in a county.
3 locations in a county.
So if we think about like a business model, like they may be mostly reaching out to really understand what that licensing process at the state level is, because that is their first entry point to being able to have a business that is licensed in the state of Minnesota. The secondary point of contact would then be, where would you be registering and operating your business? So I think that kind of points to the unknowns that we have, is that that's likely where the outreach would be happening for someone who really is considering a business.
Councilmember Bransford, did you have something on that particular point? Otherwise, okay, we'll wait on your,
Probably not. It's a little more of a technical question, so.
okay, we'll get back to you. So Councilmember Palmer is next.
Thank you. But I might have missed this, but what is the cost of a license?
Of a license up at the state,
Or here, I mean, we're gonna license them here at the county.
we're gonna register them.
We're registered, then you're correct. How much is how much is a registration?
Sure. So we cannot charge more than $500 for initial registration.
Okay, so if 5 people decide that they don't like marijuana and they want to spend $500 and buy a license, they don't have to open a business? Can they just own a license?
I would imagine there's nothing precluding it, but probably not. Again, we're entering the world of the Office of Cannabis Management's jurisdiction, because they start off with a pre-approval. The Office of Cannabis Management does not require you to have a mortgage or require you to have a premises. And so once you kind of meet their initial verification checks, they give you a pre-license. And then you're supposed to reach out to the city and get zoning approval, et cetera, at which point then the Office of Cannabis Management comes in, inspects your premises, and kind of takes you down towards final licensure. So if you are just sitting on a license, unless you're also going to commit to having a premises, commit to having an inspection of that premises, commit to having a quality check, and then basically do all of that fiscal expenditure, then it is likely, but I cannot speak for them, that they would remove your licensure.
Okay. So I mean, my opinion is that we go to 10, and my rationale for that is that we could always go bigger, correct?
That is
So
correct.
if you start at 13, you can't go back down to 10.
Correct.
And the county at that time would take care of both, but that's kind of what I would lean towards 10. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. So Councilmember Keen, did you get your questions answered? Okay, go ahead.
Again, just to clarify, I did want to check on that, the current THC, the low dose things, they can be added into any sort of business. Are the licensors or the registration we're talking about very specifically cannabis dealers, and they're not just being like added into an existing restaurant or an existing bar, that they are just a distribution center, or are they a multifaceted business?
I suspect they're a multifaceted business, but because I cannot give you a clear answer, is it all right if I circle back to you directly with that answer?
Yeah, that would be good, because I am a little thrown off, because I see most of the low dosage things are added to existing businesses.
Mhm.
But going back to your brewery example, I actually thought they were these sort of constraints that if you were getting this licensure, that's what you did, and not 5 other things in the same location.
For the retail licenses, for the ones that we're really considering today, yes.
Okay.
For the lower edible licenses, it's murkier.
No, and that's, I apologize for maybe causing some of the confusion here, but I almost think of that as a separate thing than what we're dealing with today.
Okay,
That's really not on the table. It's not one of the 10, 14, 20 that we're chosen to go with.
that's correct. And so if we're talking about today, then yes, your main business focal point is the sale of cannabis.
Okay.
Like that's what you're here to do.
Okay, so I want to try to understand the sensitivity of the interaction between the different levels of local government. I understand that you're having discussions such that the county is setting a number based on the population of the county,
Mhm.
and they've converted that population to 14 outlets or registrations. I'm trying to get my head around why it's good for the city of Rochester, which is about 70% of the county, to take all of those and claim a leadership position, and why it isn't, why is that? It almost sounds like we're challenging the county's authority.
I think you could argue that we would be if we did registration, but not necessarily. I think it would mainly be a partnership. If we were to do 14, firstly, I think a lot of smaller municipalities probably would breathe a sigh of relief, being honest. But secondly, it strikes a balance between kind of the two parties that we heard last year, where we have one side that kind of wants us to be big, be bold, follow kind of the St. Paul, Minneapolis unlimited model, but it also allows us to still be relatively constrained in the number, to still be relatively slow in our rollout, while it's also still having a little bit of our cake and eating it too. That being said, if we do 14, there does exist that world where we have all of the licenses of Olmsted County that no other municipality around us has licensure. That's a very real possibility with 14. An equally real possibility, though, is that because licensure is not initially premises-based, they could shop around. You could have a licensee that decides that they want to go to Byron, that decides that they want to go to Marion Township, and so long as Rochester has not yet registered 14 businesses, because our ordinance or our numbers for Rochester, then the county cannot tell them no. Marion Township cannot tell them no. And so you could have a license that's in Marion Township, let's say, in October, and licenses for Rochester don't start coming in until, let's say, January of 2025. Well, then we end up with our 14 licenses, and Olmsted County ends up with 15. And that's kind of a little bit of the murkiness, a little bit of the world in which we live in terms of how this is going to play out, because it's really very much a chicken and the egg situation.
I took it from your presentation that the key cost trade-off between the county doing the registration is 14. The cost to the city is we don't take on unnecessary cost at 10 or 14, but at 16, then we have absorbed that we've signaled that we're taking that sort of leadership, and we're taking the registration into the city of Rochester.
That's correct, because at 16, we've fundamentally and clearly said that we are above the county number. At 14, we're right at it. There still exists that world, as I said before, where we just have all of the licenses for Olmsted County, which for them could possibly be easier because they're just doing inspections in this one jurisdiction. When we go over 16, we're very clearly over their minimum. And so we're very clearly saying we're taking the full lead on this, and we are going intentionally above where your policy directive is, which is fine, but it means that we have to own our leadership.
So based on this, and I understand the city's recommendation to come back at 14, but I'm not there either. I would like to see us go with the idea of 10, or go with the minimum, not so much the minimum, but go with the guidance from the city, because part of my worry is that we are basically usurping the rest of the population and saying, no, we're going to capture this business in the city, as opposed to letting someone in Byron or somebody in the townships do it. So I'd feel it would more of the equity, following what the county was doing, going with the minimum. I'm looking at what's happening in the Twin Cities, and I don't quite understand the suburbs there yet. I don't understand what the counties are doing there, but it does seem like they're going to end up with a centralized distribution. And I'm modeling in the future that I think I'm looking at what our liquor store off sale looks like. And I think that would be a better model to have over time. And that's more distributed and not all consolidated into the bigger cities.
Thank you, Councilmember Keen. Councilmember Wall?
Thank you. Because Minneapolis and St. Paul do not have a limit, theoretically, is it possible that they would take all 150 licenses until the year 2026?
Yes.
Okay. And when you look at the map that was provided, clearly the great preponderance of available sites are in South Central Rochester and Northwest Rochester. Yes?
Yes.
I mean, by a long shot, like 90% of the little blue areas would be in those two places.
That's correct.
I found it interesting, and I can't remember where I read it, but we have 15 quick trips in Rochester.
Yes.
And on West Circle Drive, within a couple miles, there are 3 quick trips. Would we anticipate having 3 cannabis dispensaries along West Circle Drive, within a couple or 3 miles. I mean, that's where it's possible.
I can't speak to what the market would say, but yes, that's quite possible.
So, because it may not get back to me, it's no longer a question, but it's more a statement like Mr. Palmer. I will tell you that my ideal number, would be 0. The next ideal number would be 10 because that's the minimum. A week and a half ago, Olmsted County reported a 700% increase in drug impaired driving. Granted, small numbers, a 700% increase. Yesterday in the Star Tribune, there was a long article about the lack of testing for products coming out of tribal dispensaries. More regulation, more opportunities for really things going wrong. At the last 2 League of Minnesota Cities conventions, the cannabis presentations were very good. But what was best were the question and answers by city leaders who are apoplectic about how we are doing this thing on the fly, that there's so many things that we don't know. And you referred to that yourself, that, you know, the Office of Cannabis Management clearly says, well, you know, we don't know. We'll get to it, or we hope that we will get to it. Today at the League of Minnesota Cities legislative session, there were many cities who lifted up cannabis as a leading issue for their cities. Just as a general principle, I've always said that anything that the state legalizes and then taxes and then needs to set apart some of those taxes to treat the harm caused by that very product or behavior is really a bad idea, which is why I would like 0 rather than 10. So I guess that long and impassioned plea is just for as few as possible so that we mitigate the harm that I really believe we will be doing to a certain percentage of the people for whom this will not work well.
Thank you, Councilmember Wall. Clerk Geisler, go ahead.
Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarity, going back to one of Councilmember Keene's points regarding all of these numbers and the who's setting what limits and what all of that means. So I wanted to be clear, Councilmember Keene was asking about the concentration issue if we have 14 and the county's minimum is 14. And it's important to remember that the county's number cannot preempt any city that wants to say yes to a business. The only benefit that number serves, if you have a larger city like us inside your boundary, is that if we do get all of the licenses, other cities can opt to say no. They don't have to say no, but they can opt to say no if the county has set that limit at a specific minimum. So we could have 14 or 16 or 20 businesses, and Byron and Marion and every other township in the city or in the county could still have cannabis businesses. They are not precluded by that county minimum. That county minimum just provides them an option to opt out if that number has already been met. So I want that to be clear. Same as we can go over their minimum, so could any other city. But once that county level minimum is met, that is when it gives communities can then start choosing to opt out. So just want that to be really clear.
That's helpful. Thank you so much, Clerk. All right, Councilmember Kirkpatrick.
Thank you. Going back through your slide deck, Mr. Cartwright, you had mentioned inspections, hiring staff, what that would cost.
Mhm.
You had mentioned 21-year-olds or something. You made reference, I think I wrote this down correctly, inspection during summer months.
Just seasonal inspections. But yeah, I did say the summer, but what I really mean is just like a seasonal worker, because it would likely be that their annual inspections we would likely cluster them. And again, this would be a process question that should we hire an inspector, that we would go through, we would see what other entities do in terms of age verification checks. But it's quite possible that we might use the summer months, we might use the winter months. We'd have to figure out when would be the most opportune time to find someone that's 18, 19, 20, and hire them on, what we would pay them, are we going to do it as a cluster in terms of like the inspection process? Because we also run into, full-time employment elements, what that looks like. If we have been working for a longer period of time, then we get into other state laws in terms of, benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And so that number morphs from that 20,000 to possibly a higher number. So I just threw out summer. It's just kind of like a seasonal idea.
Okay, thank you. And then on slide 28, there was something about fees. I just wrote down slide 28. Oh, here we are, you're on it. Does the Office of Cannabis Registration fall under MDA jurisdiction?
No, the Office of Cannabis Management is its own individual office, and medical cannabis, which was once under MDH, is now.
Excuse me, not MDH, MDA, Minnesota Department of Agriculture.
Oh, I apologize. In that case, I do not know. I don't believe so, but I would have to double check.
Okay, that's, I'd like to know that because I'm assuming that it would fall under MDA and then EPA jurisdiction ultimately for enforcement as gas stations and grocery stores do for tobacco sales and that kind of thing because it's an agricultural product.
I don't think there's federal,
I don't think there would be federal oversight because of the
because it's
nature of the
not
business.
legal at the federal level.
MDA, so excuse me, MPCA, not EPA, I apologize. So I'm curious about going from the cultivator all the way up, and this would be a question maybe for you, Mr. Yetzer, looking around like you're wanting something to do maybe. So here you go. Going from cultivator all the way up, is there any zoning in our city that would allow for complete vertical integration, cultivation all the way up through manufacturing and then retail sales? That would allow for, I'm assuming that land costs in and of themselves would prohibit that type of an operation within city limits, but not within the county. So could that happen in the city?
I think in theory it's possible. I would have to dig it. But in theory.
Okay, I'd like to know that because most cannabis cultivation in this climate happens indoors and then you're using a lot of.
And that's why I think it's possible, because I think that the zoning could overlap if it's indoors.
Okay, that is, that's a special concern to me because where would this type of a facility be located within those blue spaces that Mr. Wall mentioned and that we all saw? So that would be great to know.
I can briefly speak to that if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
Yep. So again, those blue spaces really are for the parameters of those retail businesses. And so in the retail businesses, there's the two subsets of the micro and the meso. And I think that's the closest you could get possibly to the integration level because they cultivate in terms of growth and they sell. The meso business can only be 15,000 square feet and the micro business can only be 5,000 square feet. So they would fall within those blue parameters. But again, when we get into some of the other considerations, and Mr. Yetzer could possibly talk to those more about the industrial ones, the manufacturers, et cetera, the actual dedicated cultivators, which might be up to like 30,000 square feet, they operate under slightly different considerations to what we're really talking about today, which is just those retailers.
So, for instance, picture in your mind a strip mall, right? You've got your one business, business A, under MDA agriculture as a cultivator. And then there's a separate wall for another business, and business B, which is falling under the umbrella of, let's say, a larger group doing the manufacturing. And then perhaps in the back corner or adjacent spaces to business B, you've got the other retail spaces. So one business with different business filings under the Secretary of State could potentially do something like that here, correct? Or am I just assuming incorrectly?
I think that's possibly a zoning question, but my understanding is that most of the larger cultivators would have to fall under like industrial type zoning versus most of the retailers which would fall under commercial. So I suppose if there's like mixed use zones that allow for both industrial and commercial to live side by side, theoretically. it could-
Precisely. We have a zoning district that's more of a retail industrial, so it's possible. But again, that's what I'd want to do some more research.
Okay, got it. That was just kind of a follow-up question that I had written down, so thank you. So without knowing what jurisdiction the Office of Cannabis Management falls under, and I am making an assumption that it may be MDA.
I'm fairly confident it
the
is its
governor.
own
It
office.
is its own office.
Just like
The
MPCA
growing,
is its own
the
office.
growing may be under MDA, but the,
Council
No.
President,
yes. Do you have the answer?
I do have the answer.
Go ahead.
Minnesota Department of Agriculture is assisting the Office of Cannabis Management in getting set up. It does not have technical purview over the office. It is a standalone office.
Under the governor.
And medical cannabis is leaving the state Department of Health and moving over into the Office of Cannabis Management. So all of the cannabis stuff will be in one spot.
Okay, that was another point that I had written down was about the medical cards. And I'm not trying to get in the weeds here. I just happen to live in a neighborhood where, you know, I can just inhale cannabis all day long if I wanted to from my neighbors. And I don't particularly like that. So along Mr. Wall's idea of zero, I understand that there's a necessity for this. I understand that there is also a percentage of the population that can be exceedingly adversely affected by consumption, just like we know about alcohol, but it's not our job to control folks who want to try something or do something that is available to them. So is there a way that if we were to say 10 would be what we wanted to start with, could we also suggest that perhaps the Office of Cannabis Management reduce the cost of the medical cards because they are rather expensive, and then work through that process? We wouldn't work through that, but could we make a recommendation as a legislative body that would help to get that for those folks who really do utilize this biochemical really well? They need it, and it serves a really valuable purpose in their lives. I'm just throwing that idea out there. I don't know if we could,
Out of our purview.
I don't know if it would be.
I would say that's
Is it?
entirely a council decision to
Okay,
make.
all right, but we could offer the suggestion to the office.
I would just share Councilmember Kirkpatrick, council members, mayor. That would be something that you might want to discuss when your legislative policies come back to you to determine whether or not you would like to have that offer that as a suggestion. That also would be something that if we have council members on the League of Minnesota Cities groups, I'm gonna get the name wrong, that are working on different policy committees.
Yeah.
That to bring back whether or not that's something that comes up. So oftentimes we do support League of Minnesota Cities recommendations. So if that's part of our overall legislative policy, it's something that you could kind of adopt at large, or it's something that you could discuss as a legislative, policy item during your legislative discussion.
Awesome, wonderful, thank you. And then also, do we have any feedback from Chief Franklin or Sheriff Torgerson on this? What number they might suggest, or how they're feeling about this?
Yes. So they don't have a suggestion on a number, but both are in the room. No,
They're not, I already checked.
they feel that their resources would be strained should they have to do the age verification checks for cannabis. That's not an endorsement of any particular number. That is just me airing their concerns.
Thank you. I appreciate just that factual statement on that. And then last, my concern, or another concern I have is I would like the jurisdiction to fall within the city. Based on the difficulties that I have had with the Holiday gas station and the active fentanyl use that happens there continuously, the stress to staff, the stress to patrons, the stress to students, non-compliance, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, I've gotten a hold of, they're working on it now with RPD and with the county. The enforcement piece to this is really important to me. And like Mr. Wall also said, or I think maybe it was Mr. Palmer, this is a very useful biomedicine, but it can be abused. And the enforcement for any policy that we create is just of major import to me. I don't believe in making policies that can't be enforced. And I see other things going on that we don't have the capacity to enforce. So that's another big concern as we move through this. I want to make sure that we do have the enforcement ability, power, capacity, funding to be able to handle any issues that would come up as we progress through this. And that's it. Thank you.
Just clarifying question. So the enforcement would also be through the county if we,
Yeah, so when I talked about 16 and 20 and I said that we do registration, that's just an automatic registration because we're over the county's amount. At any number, we could elect to do registration. We could elect to take control of the process. So we could register 10 businesses, but then that cost advantage that I had on that first slide goes back from being the advantage right over to the disadvantage because we have to enforce it. We keep the control. We're able to do those suspensions. But even our enforcement framework is limited. Like it is centralized with the Office of Cannabis Management. The most we could do is to do a 30-day suspension, and then the Office of Cannabis Management would come down, look at our notes, look at what we've said in terms of the violations, and they would make a deciding factor about whether or not they will extend that suspension on the licensure, revoke it, or override it.
Mhm. I have some other questions, but I will turn it over to Councilmember Dennis and then Bransford.
Thank you. All right, thank you. I just want to say thank you for the presentation. This was very informative, and I appreciate the analogies that you have used for describing some of these things moving forward. I have a couple questions. First is just a clarification. So the purpose of this presentation in study session is, what I'm just reading off of the council agenda here, is to have city teammates get an idea of what council is thinking of for the amount of registrations. So we are going to be this is going to be brought back to us in an official council meeting to be voted upon, or is this what are you taking a tally right now of what our wishes or our thoughts are?
Yes, so this would be brought back to you based on kind of where you land in terms of a general framework. Likely as an ordinance, as a report and recommendation ordinance, likely at the end of the summer, early in the fall. And what our office is looking for is based on these numbers, what that ordinance looks like is very different. 10 with no registration is a much skinnier, much leaner ordinance. 20 with registration and enforcement is a much bigger, much more full ordinance.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. That's good to know that we're just getting understanding and brainstorming and asking questions at this particular meeting. So just to clarify. So I know that this is uncharted territory that the whole state, and I appreciate Councilmember Wall for going to those sessions at the League of Minnesota Cities, gaining information from other communities in our state. I personally feel I'm not knowledgeable a lot on cannabis myself. And so I've been talking to people, reaching out and asking about what is needed. And I with all the presentations that have been brought to us, with $5 billion with a B, $1 billion coming in from the Mayo Unbound project, with so much growth happening in the next few years, I feel that to have the licensure to accommodate that, potential growth would be important for the city to not put judgment and not determine whether or not, what people are using the cannabis for. I feel that we need to look as a visionary entity to say, well, we don't want to not have licensure in the future if there's only 150 that we don't, as the third largest city in the state, not have those. So I would like to go along with the staff recommendation of 14. I think there's a lot of expert people on the city staff who have analyzed this. So I would feel comfortable not going above and beyond the county, but meeting that number. So I feel that 14 would be, what I would recommend. I mean, I would just go along with what the staff has said in that. But I also want to echo what Councilmember Kirkpatrick and others have said about enforcement, as we have just gone through the 4th of July, fireworks, illegal fireworks. Without enforcement, it's just a recommendation, right? Well, is there really illegal fireworks if no one's enforcing? Is it really illegal to, and in the presentation you mentioned, I want to make sure I quote you correctly, Mr. Cartwright, but you said something about people, and please correct me if I'm not, but people who don't have license might undermine the market anyway, and just something in your presentation talked about, even if we don't have the means of taxation and having these licensures in our city, there is a potential of people just going around it. We have people growing it themselves, people who are, you might sell this. So how has that been, I guess with enforcement, we want to make sure we enforce these policies. You feel comfortable having researched that 14 is the number that the city is going with. What is going to happen to those entities that are people who are going to, as I believe was said, undermine the market and not follow these protocols and go around? Has there been talk about what's going to be done to enforce people who go around the system? Thank you.
Yes, so one of the enforcement proposals that would be in an ordinance, again, and this would depend upon if we're doing registration. So let me just quickly touch on what regulation looks like. If the county does registration, they are the regulatory entity. We basically are surrendering our authority for registration, for regulation to the county. Their inspectors do it, whatever process they have set up for hearings, whatever process they set up for citations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Registration is thus controlled by Olmsted County. If we decide to register at any number, going back to that larger ordinance that I talked about before, that would be part of the consideration. What does registration look like from an enforcement standpoint in terms of the individual who would be doing the actions? What does it look like in terms of our general authority when we come across businesses that don't have a license? Are we looking at citations? Are we looking at other punitive actions? Is that legal from a state mandate? There would be more research and more conversations to come. But that directive and that realm really is dependent upon first this conversation being wrapped up in a bow. Did that answer your question at all, or no?
Yeah, I mean, just
if we register, if we found out about illicit businesses, either through complaints or through other measures with our inspector, et cetera, my office's hope is that we would write within our ordinance a process for citing those businesses. But again, cannabis has become decriminalized. And so punitive action from like a misdemeanor standpoint could get a little messier as opposed to going from a licensing registration standpoint, which would likely be more fiscally based.
Well, there's still regulation on how much cannabis you can grow and sell and carry and all of that.
Correct.
Yes.
And that would all be part of that inspection process, part of what our hearing process would look like, evidence collection, et cetera, et cetera. We would be doing that in terms of a violation of our ordinance, and depending upon how egregious the violation is, if you wanted to kick that up to a higher level, which would then be.
He's right there.
There could, I guess what you're saying is there still could be individual criminal prosecution for having beyond the amount of individual cannabis growing in your home or your business or other type of business, unregistered, unlicensed. And there is still the potential for someone to be charged with like illicit distribution if they're still in violation of what is allowed under the recreational cannabis use state legislation.
Okay, so just, thank you for the clarification. So if we have things, entities registered, then it gives us a tool to say these are, I mean, if people are going to just be selling and doing things like under the market that was mentioned perhaps, the case, at least having the 14 or whatever actual licensures allows the law enforcement to have a tool of regulating. I feel like this is such an uncharted world, and I appreciate people who have researched deep amount. But anyway, so I wanted to just say that I feel I would go along with the staff recommendation of 14 because we are growing as a city. We are going to be have exponential growth, and I would hate to say looking down the years down the line and say, oh, we didn't have enough licensures because the council at this time just didn't think ahead and realize that our population is going to be growing and there's going to be a need for that in our city. So that's my recommendation, is to go along with the staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bransford, then the mayor.
In terms of recommendations, 10's fine. I don't have a problem with 14 either. Whatever the will or the consensus of the council seems to be 10, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. We sort of danced around it a little bit, and I wanted to clarify a point that consumption and possession within limits is legal.
Yes.
So I could, or my neighbor could, plant pot in their backyard, and if it's for their own consumption, that's perfectly fine. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Up to a certain amount.
Up to a certain,
plants. Yeah.
within the legal limits.
Right, this gets back to an enforcement
growing
issue,
like at
right?
home.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
It's complaint based, right? So.
True. Mayor.
Well, a couple points off the top. One, if we start conservatively, we can change it moving forward.
Yes.
Thank you. Two, if there is a violation suspected and if we leave it in the county's purview, does that mean the county sheriff is the only one that can handle it, or do they have a reciprocal agreement where any law enforcement could step in if it was a violation of the law?
If it's an illegal violation, then whatever the current parameters are for illegal violations and breaking of the law that exists is what would exist.
Thank you.
That was my question. One of my questions too. Thanks.
So moving on, I guess I would say I'm very supportive of the most cautious approach. Like some of my colleagues, I wish we could say zero. I hate what drugs and alcohol have done in our world. And adding this really makes me nervous. And at the legislature, I fought very hard to keep this in the medical realm and to have it very limited. So it's hard for me to watch this happening. While I know it's very popular in the community, I do tend toward the idea that we make the medical fee or card reasonably priced. And that's something that, we can talk about at a later date. It's not relevant here, but I'm okay with that. And one of the reasons 10 appeals to me is because the county has approved 14. If the city chooses to do 10, it allows 4 other options for other counties or people who might live in a township or outside the city limits to have access. And so for that reason, at least as a starting place, I liked the idea of 10. Knowing that if it's successful and if there's a demand for more, and we work out some of the issues, which we know are law enforcement and traffic violations, some of the things my colleagues have all brought up, we have to balance the costs to the community and to lives that we could choose. If there aren't any, or if they're minimal, we could choose to expand at some future date. So my personal preference is that we start carefully and cautiously and review it in a year or 2 years. And if we need to add more, we can. If we don't need to add more, there's no need. That's my position.
Thanks, Mayor.
Council President,
Yeah.
may I interject something? Council members, Mayor Norton, just to give a little bit of clarity to a statement that Mayor Norton just made, which was a true statement, but I want to say the read between the lines part, because you already heard me say that if we have 14 and the county's limit is 14, that doesn't preclude other cities. But if we go with 10 and the mayor stating that leaves 4 for other businesses, what that would do is it shifts the power away from the townships and to the licensee. Because if we only have 10, then those other 4 businesses,
Can get approved.
the other cities and townships are not able to say no. So I want that to be very clear what the nuance is there. If we're choosing 10 or 14, we could choose 300. It doesn't matter. If other cities wanted to go over 14, they can. But if we're over 14, then they can say no. If we're under 14, then they can't say no. That's the difference.
Thanks for
Can
that.
I,
Clerk.
can
Did
I ask
somebody
for
else have-
clarity on that though? Thank you, just because it's on the same point. If if some of the smaller cities don't want to take up this issue, but they reside within a county and there are 4 open, they could apply for them, whether the city has taken a position one way or another, or the,
That's correct. If they don't take up a position, then that means that's sort of an implication of wanting 0 and leaning on the county to set the limit.
thank you.
Okay, Ms. Elms?
Just before we continue to get this question, I think it's important to note that when the, just doing a quick search, when the recreational marijuana was authorized in 2023, they did eliminate the annual fees for a medical marijuana license, and they are not subject to the 10% cannabis tax. And patients now only have to renew their certification, which is free, every 3 years instead of annually. So.
Okay, I think there have been some really wonderful points brought up from most of my colleagues here. I don't have too much to add other than I really appreciate you laying out sort of the pros and cons and the considerations. I think those are largely from the city perspective. And so I'm trying to think about community perspective and interests of retailers and balancing that with my concerns really related to public health and knowing we have minimal control here, but how do you balance that? And I'm sort of still leaning towards the lowest amount, maybe up to 12 or something, but 14 starts to feel a little bit high as a starting point, knowing that we can see how things are going and make decisions to adapt over time. So I'm really leaning there's no right answer here. This is one of those like, we're going to let people down no matter what. So it's hard to say, but yes, I would say on the low end is my comfort zone. Councilmember Kirkpatrick.
Thank you. I think you had said, Mr. Cartwright, within 1,000 feet of a school and then 500 feet of what?
Parks.
Thank you. Is that the same for narcotics?
To clarify, the standard is 500 feet away from parks, not.
No, yep, I understand that, but I'm just wondering, is it the same for narcotics? Is the Office of Cannabis Legislation following that same distance away as narcotics are?
Illegal. Is that an ingest question or?
No, it's not an ingest question. It has to do with the enforcement and fines or,
Narcotics are illegal. What's the?
they certainly are.
Where there's enhanced penalty, maybe.
Yes,
Oh,
right,
okay.
yeah,
There's
exactly.
enhanced penalties.
Yes.
Well, that's what you're
Yes,
getting at. Got
yes.
it. Okay.
So I'm just wondering if it's the same.
I don't know that they necessarily walk together. Ours is more of a creature of zoning that Mr. Yetzer can tell you more about.
The standard that you repeated there is a local control. You folks have set that standard, so I would doubt that they're aligned.
That's interesting. I would think that they should be. Just food for thought. Thanks.
I think everybody's had a chance to weigh in. Thank you so much to the clerk's office for being so well prepared and responsive to our questions. And sounds like we're mostly leaning in that 10 to 14 range to be brought back.
Okay, so final point of clarification for
Yeah.
myself then. 10 to 14 and the county does registration.
Oh, that was my other point. I know that Councilmember Kirkpatrick mentioned interest in us regulating, but just having gone through the massage therapist regulation, I am incredibly impressed with the team at the county and want to support our partnership and allowing them to take that part on. So you can disagree with me. Go ahead.
I absolutely disagree with you, as in the fact that numerous reports to Olmsted County Public Health about the active fentanyl use was not responded to by the county, and I took it into my own hands to call the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
Public
And the
safety
MDA
perspective of police, of law enforcement. We're talking about administration.
But what I'm saying is it was never reported. They could have as they have the jurisdiction for public health, public safety, our county, they could have reached out to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and the MPCA for air quality enforcements for those kinds of things.
Okay.
So because I have that experience of taking that on myself, I'm a little concerned that the county may fall short here. That's just my stating a fact.
Okay. I have no concern.
Thank you.
Councilmember Keen, wrap us up.
Well, again, I just wanted to, I heard summarization that was different than what I thought I had heard through the meeting. So I thought I was trying to give guidance towards 10. I like the idea of the county doing the controls, but I will state that I think my reasons for 10 or a lower or starting number are probably different than my peers. I do want the opportunity for some of these other things to happen other than in Rochester. I think the idea of going to 0 or 10 implies that we're going to not have this, and we're past that. It's state law now. This is going to happen, and the question is where it's going to happen. So that's where my number comes out for. But I think I heard at least 3 or 4 different 10s here versus 10 to 14 or 10 to, like, we're still up in the air. I don't think we're there, but that was my hearing of the discussion.
To clarify, I
We
heard
heard-
5 10s and that people would be more comfortable in the
Yeah,
bottom.
I think that I agree with you. I'm just acknowledging that there were a couple 14, so that was my point for staff to take into consideration, and we can all have our own independent reasons and still make a decision on a shared policy.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Let's take a break for 10 minutes. See you back at 5:15.
Recording stopped.
Cindy Steinhauser here to talk about our environmental sustainability and
Recording in progress.
mission report. Go ahead.
Thank you, Council President Carlson, Mayor Norton, members of the City Council, Cindy Steinhauser, Deputy City Administrator. I will be presenting, but also with me is our Sustainability Coordinator, Kayla Betzold. She's available for questions as well, because she's been getting involved in this process. And I also just want to acknowledge there are two commissioners here from the Sustainability and Resiliency Commission. So with that, let me just provide you an update. So following when we brought this item to you on June 17th, asking for your adoption of this as a guiding plan, the request was to come back and provide some better information about how we got here and help provide some context. So that's what I'm here to do today. So as this slide indicates, this has been a really terrific journey that Rochester has been on. Very specifically as it relates to this community plan, we've been doing this since November 2019. Council took action that a community task force be established with the intent of developing a inclusive community engagement process that ultimately developed a program and plan around sustainability and resiliency. We came to you with that plan in June of 2021, and since then we've been really using it as a guiding document as we think about the work that we're doing, whether it's through budget requests, as we pursue funding, trying to leverage existing community dollars and the work that we're doing, really providing a roadmap for our community members who are interested in this work, and also as a measurement tool. When we began this process, we felt like it was really important that we acknowledge the targets that are already established. They help inform the plan and inform the conversation with the community. And so here's just a reminder, and maybe Rachel, if we could move, or if we could move the caption box so we can see the content. Thank you. Just a reminder of what those targets are. Those targets were adopted by the City Council. And I really love this graphic because it shows that we've been on this journey. This wasn't just something that started in 2019. It really got traction in 2019. But as you can see, we've really been on this journey as early as 2007, when there was a lot of conversation and the establishment of the Energy Commission, which has been reconstituted as a Sustainability and Resiliency Commission. So we're really representing that triple bottom line. So I won't go through all of it, but as you can see, a lot of really significant steps taken around approaching sustainability from a triple bottom line. And so with that, in 2019, after you gave us direction to advance creating a task force, we sat down with the mayor and really talked about how we could have an impactful and effective recruitment process. It seems like how far we've come since 2019. Now there's just some really great procedures already in place. We have things like co-design, and we have really, really good tools. And I feel like some of this early work, where those protocols and programming was not in place, we helped inform what we are using today. And so when we sat down, it was both ourselves, representatives from DMC, Kevin Bright, because in part DMC was helping to fund this through the McKnight grant, which was focused around sustainability, and said, how can we really make this a robust recruitment process that really represented the community? And so when we looked at it, we tried to think about triple bond of sustainability, identify about 100 individuals the mayor sent or agencies or organizations that we wanted represented. The mayor sent a letter of invitation, 40 people responded and accepted. And from there, we began what was a 2-year process to think about a roadmap over the next 10 to 15 years. Again, meant to be a roadmap for the community, not exclusively the city, but a roadmap for the community. And that's why it was so important to get this task force right and make sure that it was really great cross-representation. So the next 3 slides, I won't go through all of them, but they really help you and the community understand who was represented on this. And we really tried to make sure that we represented business, nonprofit, institutions, education, youth, faith community, people from different cultural backgrounds. And so as you can see from the 40 plus task force members, we really tried to get that cross representation. And then we took a look at what's the process that this task force should use for engagement. And again, thinking about equity, and when you think about sustainability and the people who have access to resources versus not having access to resources, and thinking about those communities most impacted, marginalized communities who either are not at the table with a voice or not at the table with resources. And so we really used this excuse me, graphic as a way to guide the conversation with the community, thinking about who is highly impacted but has low access. And again, impact is either I'm directly impacted by the decision or there's an immediate impact for me. Access is my access to either design a policy or a solution, or have the resources to be able to implement the solution that's being presented, right? So when we think about people that are highly impacted but have low access, I would say it's a fair statement to say the task force was really concerned because those are the most people that tend to be in the most marginalized bucket, right? They're highly impacted but low access. And then you make your way across the graphic, highly impacted with high access, less impacted but low access, less impacted, high access. And so from there, despite a global pandemic, we developed what I think was a really robust engagement process. We had some initial kickoff meetings that informed the engagement approach. We did 37 community listening sessions, 40 different agencies were represented in those listening sessions. We did multilingual outreach, primarily in the form of a survey. And the really important piece of this is as we would iterate, we would identify, we'd at the conclusion of these sessions, we would recap the themes, we'd identify gaps, and that would inform the strategies. And so again, here's just kind of another graphic and a way to say, how did we seek engagement across different sectors? Again, whether it was a cultural community, we involved city departments because some of this work lives at the city. A lot of it also lives in the community, the health and wellness bucket, education bucket. So this is just a different way to think about those groups and their input into this plan and what bucket they primarily identified with, but certainly could identify with other buckets. And then, there we go. That resulted in nearly 1,600 hours of engagement between those task force meetings, between strategy sessions, reaching out to the community. And again, after the conclusion of those sessions, we took that information back. And after we developed the strategies and tactics, we met again with community groups to really tell them that we heard you, right? Those listening sessions resulted in the strategies and the tactics that you see in the plan and really helped inform the plan. So they knew that their feedback they got feedback that they were being heard. And so here's what we heard, right? And again, this graphic to me just really reinforces our approach that we shifted from not exclusively, but really a heavy emphasis on energy, but more to that triple bottom line. As you see what they heard and what the community wanted this plan to represent, it is across the triple bottom line around sustainability. And this is also a really great graphic to help us understand, again, that this is not only a guiding tool for the city, but a lot of community members really need to help own this plan because the work lives outside of the city and it lives in these respective buckets and organizations. Here's another graphic just as a way to say when we put together the strategies and the tactics, it was really in these 6 buckets around climate change, being a city for health, thinking about vibrant neighborhoods, thinking about accessible transportation, a resilient economy, and environmental health. And so ultimately we came up with 33 strategies and 103 tactics. Now I know that sounds a lot, and we had a pause when we first put the plan together to say, is that doable? But when you think about the plan, it's spread over a 10 to 15 year window. Here is a really, to help you understand very simply how each of those tactics then align against your strategic priorities, right? So your 3 priorities really came into shape as we were halfway through this plan. But as you can see, the process really helped align the work to your 3 strategic priorities. And well, I love that because that means that we were getting what the administrator always talks to us about, where do we have clarity, unity, and alignment. And so again, nice generally an even disbursement across across the three tactics. And so then for how to read this document, right? So how the document is laid out is it's under the strategy, whether it's one of those 6 buckets like climate resiliency, neighborhoods, transportation, et cetera. So you see what the strategy is. In this case, this is strategy C7. That means it's under the climate change resiliency goal bucket. It's strategy number 7, and it's supporting the implementation of RPU's transition to 100% renewable energy. And we try to identify where does that align with the city council's priorities? Where does it align with our comprehensive plan? And of course, where does it align with UN Sustainable Development Goal? And a tactic that's specific to that strategy, and then the justification for that. And again, you can see it's cut off, unfortunately, but when we think about the tactic timeline, when we talk about short term, generally we were looking at a 3 to 5 year window. Midterm is 6 to 10 years, and long-term is 11 to 15 years. That doesn't mean some of the midterm and long-term stuff doesn't start now, because there's some work that needs to be done to get to that space. But certainly there is lower hanging fruit that the task force identified that we can be working. So here's some really great analysis of kind of where we are at. And again, when we think about this, this plan is really 50-50. Like there's a lot of city-led work here, but there's a lot of community-led work here in each of the tactics. And this helps you understand where we're at in terms of what's in progress, what's not started short-term, not started midterm, not started long-term, and what's completed. And the same thing on the community-led side. Following the conversation on June 17th, not only did we think it was important to come back and help you understand the work that we got that got us to the point of creating the plan, but Kayla, along with Lauren Jensen at DMC, went through and took a look at the plan and said, what's still relevant? What needs to be updated? Since the plan was brought to you a couple of years ago, there's been a number of changes. There's been legislative changes, for example, around benchmarking. So that was a tactic we can take out of there because we have that policy that now lives at the state level. There are things in here. We now have a Sustainability and Resiliency Commission instead of an Energy Commission. And so we have reference to the Energy Commission throughout the document that needs to be updated. So Kayla and Lauren went through an exercise at staff level review and just looked at where there were things that we highlighted that needed updating because it was out of compliance with new state or federal regulations. It reflects our updated reduction targets. And then there's outdated or conflicting items. So for example, I'll just go straight to the 4th bullet on RPU's regulatory policy. The original tactic was evaluating options to redesign utility incentive programs or other funding opportunities and so forth. And really revising to say, evaluate options to design incentive programs because the program that specifically mentioned it, and the name is escaping me, but it's a really minuscule amount of money, and our time would be better spent on thinking about general incentive programs as opposed to focusing on that really narrow band of a policy, which, pardon me? Demand management, thank you, yeah. So Kayla and Lauren went through that exercise to make sure that the plan is relevant based on some of those changes. And it's been a successful tool for us. Again, when we think about how do we leverage outside resources to advance our only work, but also a plan as robust as this, where we can say we had such a great cross-representation of the community. It is truly an initiative that the community is behind because 2-year process, 40 task force members, 1,600 hours of work put to inform this plan, sends a message to the state and the federal agencies that we're a community that has coalesced around that particular thing that we're asking for. And it strengthens our application, makes it more competitive as compared to other communities. And we've been very successful, right, in getting grant funding support where we have in some way, shape, or form used elements of this plan to inform that application. It has also helped inform other plans. Again, we want to create alignment across the work that we're doing. So active transportation, surface water management plan. And then, of course, I always, not that we shouldn't give, not that awards aren't important, but some people think, oh, they're not. You know, awards just make us feel good. What I like to say about awards and recognition, they're an affirmation by an outside third party that what we are doing is on the right path, whether it is we are in alignment with the goal and we're successfully reaching that goal, we are in alignment with how we put it together. So it's that third party check that tells us what you're doing is right, and that's why I put awards and recognition under that bucket.
Cindy, can I add one point? We also got recognized by the U.S. Conference of Mayors as an honorable mention in the top 3 in 2021, I believe, during the pandemic. It was done, the conference was online. So we can add that.
Thank you, Mayor. That's right. We will add that. So in addition to looking at doing a review of the plan and saying what needs to be updated, what language needs to be clarified, modified, but I should say, but does not take us out of alignment with the original intent of that tactic. It's still very much in alignment with what the task force had intended around that, either that strategy or that tactic. We also said, what's our focus for this next year? And we wanted to really bucket it into the your three strategic priorities under affordable living, economic vibrancy, and quality services, right? So as we think about the prioritization of our work out of this plan and out of our general action plan in affordable living, we're starting to get a lot of traction around our energy efficiency block grant, conservation block grant, and the education components that block grant is going to fund, as well as some other physical things that it's going to fund. Really getting in, working more in tandem with RPU. That partnership really continues to grow across our team, thinking about incentives and education around IRA funding and how homeowners and businesses can tap into that. When we think about economic vibrancy and growth management, it's really working in partnership with RPU on that commercial benchmark program that was state legislation. And I don't know if we've gotten word yet if we're going to get the funding or not, but there's funding made available. We've applied, RPU has applied for it. We'll help with that rollout. And then under quality services, the environmental health bucket, continuing the work on the air quality monitoring program. And I think there was some communication with an update sent out about that last week or the week before, if I'm not mistaken. So when we think about 2025 and focus areas of the plan, this is where we're going to put our attention on. And again, just thinking about this plan is a community plan, right? It's a guiding document that we use, whether for bringing policies forward or budget requests. And I put in that budget request bucket, pursuing funding to outside agencies, whether it's at state or federal, philanthropic, outside dollars. It's that documentation we need to pursue those resources. It is a roadmap for the community. There is all kinds of great stuff in here for partner organizations, members of the public to pick up and help advance. And it's a good tool for us to use for performance measure, specifically as we think about our target reduction goals. So our intent had been, to bring it forward to ask you to concur with it as a guiding document. And I think for us today, just are requesting some direction on how you would like to see this plan be brought forward to the City Council. And with that, thank you.
All right, thank you for the recap. We will start with Councilmember Bransford.
Thank you. And I just wanted to put out there, and I do have some questions, but I just want to say, a document this large, not everybody's going to agree with everything in there, but for me, I see this as some really good aspirational goals. I don't have to agree with every single way something is phrased, but nor do I want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I agree with the approach in principle. So I'm not going to nitpick, but I do have the question about adopting this. Is adopting this similar to the city's comprehensive plan? Do you see this as similar, or, compare, contrast?
I would not see it as similar, right? The comprehensive plan leads you into, I think, more of a regulatory environment. And actually, maybe Ryan could speak to the regulatory environment of the comprehensive plan. But I would see it is meant to be a resource for us, right? It is, there are, as we bring forward a recommendation to do micromobility, we can clearly point to strategies in the plan and our reduction goals that we say there's alignment. The community said they wanted to see these kinds of things. Here's a way in which we're going to approach that. We're going to do a micromobility project, for example. So I would not say it does not have the legislative and regulatory teeth, but it is a really good reference document for
Okay.
us to use.
Good. That's what I wanted to hear. So, since it isn't regulatory in the sense that you were talking about, so what's the process of changing some of the tactics or strategies? Would the sustainability group go, boy, you know, we want to like reword something in there, and if we as a council approve it, does that have to come back to us to approve the change, or what's the process for updating it?
Yeah, that's a
Once
really,
it's approved.
yeah, that, once it's approved, yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think, I don't want to say it depends, but it depends, right? If a suggestion is brought forward for a change, we would do some analysis to say that really feels like we're straying from what the intent of what the task force wanted, then I think that needs a little bit more work, right? That would need to either through the Kayla working with the, doing some outreach and some engagement around that tactic. But if it is some wordsmithing, if it is to reflect like what we saw with the RPU benchmarking, saying this is now the current state based on state legislation, I think those come forward to city council. We can bring those forward a lot more quickly. If it's something that we feel like gets out of scope with what the task force wanted, we would want to think about and bring back to you a recommendation of how we get some more feedback on on that tactic, but ultimately bringing it back, an updated plan to you.
Right, so a specific instance of a tactic that you are wanting to implement that isn't budget neutral would come before the council to say, we're gonna implement microtransit, this is the hit to the CIP, this is the hit to the, our bottom line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That would be kind of a study session followed by a vote or something to that
I would
effect.
say actually in that example, it should come through the budget process. It
Okay,
should always come through the budget process.
okay, yep.
Yeah.
That sounds good. And the last question I have is maybe both a question and maybe a comment. Do you see this as a guideline for informing the council as to legislative priorities?
I think it could, yes. I think let's be real, the plan is already almost 3 years old, right? But it is a 10 to 15 year window of a plan. I think that there are certainly, it's one input. It's not your only input to inform your legislative priorities.
Of course not. There's a lot, I mean, that's very multifaceted, what we do for legislative priorities. I'm just saying this is a tool, a blueprint that could say, boy, the community really wants to invest in microtransit, et cetera. I'm just using that as an example. So really this should be, we should go get grants. We should go make that a legislative priority. So do you see it kind of playing in that role as well?
Yes, and I would maybe flip it and say, hey, we've got this legislative priority. We would go and say, what does our comprehensive plan say about that? Say it's micromobility. What's the comprehensive plan say? What does the integrated traffic study say? What does our sustainability resiliency plan say? So that we reconcile what we're suggesting as a legislative priority isn't in conflict with plans that you as a council have adopted or endorsed.
Other comments, questions? Councilmember Wall?
So, a few weeks ago, I indicated discomfort with adopting a work plan. And I've done a lot of thinking. I've studied the 75 pages. I can't say that I'm in a different place, although I think that I have a much better understanding of the 103 tactics. Like Mr. Bransford, I don't believe anybody will agree with 103 tactics. We're all going to have some differences of opinion. I'm still wondering what functional difference there is with the work plan if it's adopted or if it's not adopted. It's currently working for the city.
So I would say, and maybe adopted is not the right word, because when we think about, we adopt the comprehensive plan, we adopt the integrated traffic study, and maybe it's concurrence of this document as a guiding plan, right? And where we see it, where I see it personally, is when we are speaking to, for example, pursuing state or federal dollars, and you reference a document like this, but as a policy decision-making board, you haven't taken action. You take an action to initiate, but you've not taken action to accept it. That's what has been in other communities. They accept it as a document, right? And so sometimes that can send the wrong message to, when you apply for other funding opportunities, it sends the wrong message because you haven't closed the loop on the plan, right? You have, we're, for all intents and purposes, using it, operating it as a useful tool and document, but as a policy decision-making body, you have not concurred with acceptance of the plan, I guess is what I would say. And
Although that which you postulated hasn't happened. That is, it has been used effectively without adoption by the council.
that is correct. What I can't tell you is why we didn't get some of the things we pursued. Some of the funding that we didn't, funding that we pursued, why we didn't get it. Was it because we didn't show support through official action?
Mhm. And I also,
I would think that's low, but I mean, I've seen that in other communities, so.
I also think that we need to be careful when we say the community has said they want this. 103 tactics, some will want some will want others. I would think it'd be more accurate to say a subset or the interested parties who made up those who responded to surveys and or served on the committee are in favor of. I'll give you an example, tactic T2 on electric vehicles. I am the new proud owner of an electric vehicle, and I would be supportive personally of advancing that kind of technology in Rochester. My guess is, however, if something went on a ballot like the sales tax vote that said, would you be in favor of spending dollars on staff time and or facilities, tax dollars, to advance this tactic? My guess is we wouldn't get 50% of the community to say, we think that's a really great idea, when only 0.68% of the cars and light trucks registered in Minnesota are EVs. And last year's 2023, I've done this research because I have one now. In 2023, 3.2% of vehicles, new vehicles sold, were EVs. This is a good aspirational document. I believe that. Again, I'm kind of stuck on the council adopting it or even accepting it in some way that would bind the council to each one of the tactics with things that will happen over the next 15 years.
So just a couple things. I wouldn't say it binds the council, right? It does not do that. It's not a regulatory document. It's not a legislative document. It's a roadmap. And I would.
That helps.
Yeah. And I would say, to your point about, does this, I think there were 119,000 Rochester residents at the time. There's now 123, right? At the time we put the plan together. I don't want to call it co-design because it wasn't true co-design process, but I would say it was a co-design before we did co-design. When all those task force members were charged with going back and seeking input from the groups that they represented, right? There's a lot more, there's a lot more methodical and systematic approach to co-design now. But certainly I would say it's represents the community and organizations far beyond the 40 representatives that were there. Does it represent 119,000? I feel confident that 123,000 people will find something in this plan that they like and something in this plan that they don't like.
I think that's fair.
Right, Councilmember Palmer.
Well, thank you. And I believe Mr. Bransford and Mr. Wall is kind of leaning towards us accepting it and not approving it. And I think that there's some words there that makes a big difference to me. One of the problems that I have with this is you take any one of the items and say, you know, do I want a free car? You know, I mean, and so what does it cost? And so I have difficulties when we have surveys out there done or getting input that there's no cost associated to it, no cost. One of my fears is also if you approve this is in 3 months from now, you're going to come back to us and say, back in July, you approved this, and this is why we're recommending this. And everybody gets upset that we've changed our mind, or we find out what the costs are. And so, you know, as a document, I think it's a great document. I think that it deserved to have a study session and have this explained to us, you know, instead of being just put on the consent agenda. You know, to me that this is a good point. You're saying to us that it's a guiding tool, so that's, you know, comes back as accepting it makes sense to me. One of the things on your pages, on page 13, you had the largest number of what people had was other. Everything else is 2.1%. And so, you know, I get a little you know, a little worried when I see the biggest one is other, and at 21%. So, you know, that doesn't tell me that you had clarity in the want to do this. Do I think this is a nice document? I think it's a nice document. Do I think that we should accept it? I think we should accept it and acknowledge that we have it. And obviously, as Mr. Wall was saying, you've been using it and it's not been a problem. And, you know, I was troubled by the fact that, you know, you're describing the energy department or energy commission. We don't have an energy commission. So why do I want to approve something I know that's wrong? You know, and so I appreciate you going through there and taking care of some of those things. So, you know, I would be very comfortable accepting this, and I appreciate the work that's gone into it and the explanation of all the work. I think that that's important for people to understand that this is not just a weekend by 3 staff members. I mean, this is a lot of work that went into this. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And honestly, it was a really good, it's a great exercise and a reminder to us as city staff, right? Like when we bring stuff forward, you know, we knew we had to come back at a study session. And so we took a fresh look at it and to go through the document the way Kayla and Lauren did and go, okay, this wasn't ready. We needed to do some cleanup. So I appreciate the fact that we had that conversation and that we're here today. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Keen? You're ready?
I'll be ready, yes. So, hey, I appreciate the way you brought this to us today. This is slightly different than the way I've seen it before. And the fact of tying it to our strategic priorities, it's to me a nice way to communicate this. But it does call out that we've communicated it different ways over the years. The document itself uses these 6 categories of, I'm looking for them here, you know, climate change, resiliency, city of health. And again, we're going to summarize it today without those. And I'm good with that. I think they're always just techniques for how to communicate it. We also used to use the triple bottom line when we were building this plan back in, before we were building this plan, when we were trying to staff the Sustainability Commission. And those stories, they seem to fall away sometimes. I think we should always be looking for the way to communicate who we're communicating with. And I find the idea of coming to the council and using our strategic priorities is a good way to do it. Do you think I'm missing anything when you go from tying the sustainability work plan to our things and not using the 6 categories or the triple bottom line? Are there things being lost here in communication?
No, I think you bring up a really good point. And I've looked at this quite a few times since we came to you in June. Here's how I would say it. We were well into the process, or I can go back to that. We were well into the process of getting input and developing this plan and our approach. Because the council didn't have your 3 strategic priorities. Like this is
right.
it's a good reminder of why
Time marches.
policy bodies need to set policy and make it clear, because we created these buckets for lack of having really clear strategic priorities. You created your strategic priorities and we brought those into the process, but because we were well into using these 6 buckets, we didn't want to abandon them. If you were to say to me, starting today, we would use your 3 strategic priorities.
Yep.
We wouldn't have these 6 buckets, but we would address things
Yes.
around neighborhoods and transportation and climate, energy and environmental health, but we would address them under your 3 strategic priorities. So that's why we tried to bring in that link to your 3 priorities. So
Yeah, and
great observation.
No, I accept that
Agree
as a
with
good
you.
way to do this stuff. As far as this, I so wish we didn't call this a work plan. I do think of it more as Councilmember Bransford brings up the comp plan, but I think of the comp plan having other more detailed plans underneath it. Something like the active transportation plan. I think of this as one of those things that meet that. And I do think it's important that it be both like, strategic, the things that are important to us, but also aspirational. But I also don't consider it any sort of commitment to a work plan. And the fact that it's called a work plan and asking for us to adopt it is a little bit scary for me. But I look at this as it's important to get the city council endorsement of this work that came from the community, that continues on over time. I mean, things morph a lot in 3 years. I've watched the RPU plan that's approved in 2019. We're 5 years older now, and it's a lot more of a mature concept, and it's bumping into what's available in the real world. And we're working through that. And I think it's important that this council, with that kind of work going on, that we endorse the endeavors to make sure that people feel like they're working on things that are important to the city through this council.
And can I just add
Yes,
to
please.
build off of that, and then absolutely. And then how it works for the city tactics is, as we do our biannual budgeting process, we bring things that are endorsed in this plan through the budget process. That's how that works.
Yeah.
And how it should work.
That's probably a good segue to, can you comment on how this plan and what we talked about some of these high level things with what's going on with our energy generation plan in the future, with what's going on with geothermal for our own buildings. Some of these major things are going on, but then we get a big group of concerned citizens says, you're not doing enough. Where does that disconnect happen?
In terms of,
I'm thinking of last fall, trying to close our budget, where we had groups coming in saying, you're dropping the ball here on sustainability. There's all these new opportunities and you're not taking advantage of them. And then at the same time, we've got some that says like, you've gone too far.
yeah, I mean, that is the struggle with putting a policy budget together every other year, right? You've got competing interests. You've got stormwater management, you've got public safety, you've got parades, and
Yeah.
special events and civic music. And I would say that you rely on your city team led by the city administrator, that we bring forward the best recommendations we can, knowing the limited pool of resources. And while we may not be on target to that goal, we're still marching towards that goal, right? And so then it becomes an exercise of like, okay, there's more things to fund than there are resources available, but what starts to move the needle across all the departments and across all this work in alignment with your 3 strategic priorities? And it becomes an exercise in saying, are the timelines that we've set up for ourselves in terms of our reductions, are they realistic? Do they need to be revisited? Do we need to adjust those based on, or do you say, no, you know what, they don't need to be adjusted and we're going to do a 25% levy because we want all this to happen? And I know that's not what you're saying.
No.
And so I think that's what the public needs to remind. You cannot do you cannot do a 25% levy to make all these things happen. So it's got to be, how does this fit within the program of all the other services as a city that we have to provide, the day-to-day operational, the leaving space for the aspirational, and as well as trying to meet targets.
Yeah, and it's a good point. And there's always going to be conflict with a 123,000 person community where we're going to have things that we're not going far enough and we've gone too far. And I think sometimes there should be a little bit of comfort in there for us that says we're somewhere in between the two.
Absolutely.
Again, I'm ready and able, feel like it would be an important thing for this council to endorse, especially the idea of the priorities in the sustainability plan, if not the exact work plan. So with that, I hope we can get this in front of us again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Keen. Councilmember Dennis.
I just want to say, thank you for bringing this back. Study session was really important. I feel how it was originally done, putting it on a consent agenda, we can't just rubber stamp something, because when we put our name on a document or anything, the city approves, votes for, whatever the wording is, we are saying that we agree with word for word, we agree with the document. And this is intense. It's a large document. I mean, you look like each tactic, I mean, there is a half-hour discussion on many of these that I find would just not be giving justice to say, oh, we approve. I mean, I want to say for the record, myself, and I'm assuming the council, but for myself, a huge support of sustainability and wanting to make sure that we have policies in place that force our city to look for the future and make sure that we are economically making sure that people have, we have a priority for our environment and our growth in our city. So I definitely am a big fan of the concept. I'm echoing a little bit about what colleagues have said about they didn't say this, but I'm saying this, the devil in the details. When you look at some of these specific tactics, I see these diverse groups represented, and you presented it like kind of flew by with the presentation here. But if we go online, you can look. That's great groups. I mean, amazing groups. I highly have a lot of admiration for all of these groups, but I don't think there's enough stakeholders on this list. When we're talking about influencing companies, what they, plastics they use, or, garbage. And I mean, I'm not going to go into each of the tasks, but there's some real things that are going to impact people's lives. And there's cost situations and affordable housing that might be cost be increased if we dictate that we have to have EVs and we have to have things implemented. This is really a deep document. So I'm not comfortable with saying that we are just going to say, yes, we're going to sign our name, and then have it come back and say, well, did you see, page 132 section, to have people go through and say, well, the council approved this. I think there needs to be more stakeholders. So I feel this should come back as a public hearing or something that, so people can have more of a say, that people that aren't on this list of task force membership can say, hey, we want to voice opinion about this specific tactic with this, because there's people in the audience here right now who can't speak because it's a study session, right? They're silenced, right? We're having our little discussion up here. I feel that people should have a voice, and it should come back in a way that people have a means to say, hey, this will impact my company, this will impact my life, this will impact my future because of whatever is being implemented. So I think words have power, and like the saying, the devil's in details. This stuff is important and needs to be prioritized, needs to be on the lens and the voice and of every single decision we make. It needs to be the future of our planet and the future of our community. However, to rubber stamp something that's an amazingly huge document that many people say they have doubts on, I think is an injustice for the community that has not been able to have a say. So I would like to see this come back. I don't want to say approval. I don't want to say any kind of words because I'm not even sure what all this means, what we're even doing here other than learning about it at this moment in time. But I think when it comes back to the council, it needs to come back in a public hearing so that people, the citizens, the community stakeholders have an ability to have a say in some of these specific items that are in document that we're going to make policy as a board. Thank you.
So I would just, and I would just comment, and I don't know if Administrator Zums has some additional comments. So it would normally come back as reports and recommendation. It's not a legally binding document. It wouldn't come as a public hearing. If I'm hearing the council discussion so far, when you take something like this and you receive it, it's an acknowledgement, but it is not something that becomes a mandate for the city. It becomes a guiding tool. So again, you receiving it doesn't mean that you have suddenly awarded funding to the 53 tactics that are identified in the city's bucket. It's 53 tactics over the next 15 years that as we do our work around sustainability and resiliency, we know that they were identified as a priority by the community. It doesn't automatically say you've set policy and you've set funding for it. So I just want to be really clear that that is not what an endorsement or a receive and file of this document would mean. And I don't know if administrators, anything else you wanted to add if I spoke incorrectly?
No, I think everything that you said is completely on point, and we've heard here from folks on the dais sharing that that the words that we use will be important, and whatever that is, that whatever we put, that what we bring back to the city council, we need to be clear in the RCA of the things that were said today, that this is a guiding document, that it doesn't bind the city council, that any major policy changes that come forward as a result of it have separate action, as we do with many other things for the city council. So I think it was really helpful to hear from all of you, and well, maybe we haven't heard from everyone yet. Everything that was said here is also a public record, and so I think that also helps to clarify that what people have discussed here is that this is a guiding document, and I think it was very well said that when you have 103 different tactics and 123,000 people, what we can be sure of is that some people will love some and not love some, and that is how the world works in a democratic form of government. So I do think it's also to the point of the city council members who have shared it, that part of the challenge is there are many people who might really love one of the 103 tactics, and if they don't see it come first, it's really challenging for them to feel like we've supported the plan. So, and that's every document that you've approved, endorsed, accepted, seen. So that's just human nature, right? So that, I don't think you can fully overcome that with, communication, but I think that we can acknowledge that there are things that some people are really passionate about, and that one didn't line up first on the list of things to accomplish within a budget. And that doesn't mean that we didn't accomplish things. It means that that person that's very passionate about that one tactic is still going to continue to be passionate about it. So
That was well said. Thank you. Mayor Norton.
Thank you very much. So first I want to thank the administration for finding a time prior to the end of September to bring this forward. We've been working on this document since I became mayor in 2019. It's been really hard. The pandemic slowed everything down, and then it's been really hard to wait to have this finally come back. And I think a couple things. It was started back in 19. The city council that was sitting in June of 2021 has heard some of this before. Not all of you were here then. I understand that. And I just think, and this has been said in 10 different ways, I guess I'm going to say it in the 11th. There's no way to get a document that 100% of the community supports. It's never going to happen. It doesn't happen. What we've done here is involve a large swath of the community, hired professionals. We didn't talk about that, but we hired a consulting firm to help put this together, and our professional staff who did their best over a 1.5 year period of time of coming together to bring a document forward that outlined the future of Rochester. And it's not policy and it's not budget. That's been explained. Those, any policy changes, and I can just tell you at Thursdays downtown, a woman came up to me and said, why have we not banned styrofoam in this community, right? Those are the policy changes that would have to come forward. And I doubt we'd have 100% agreement on that here. But those are the kind of policy decisions that you may or may not ever be asked to vote on. This is a document that sets a direction for the city, and it's been recognized. It's done a great job, and it has been mentioned it'll come through when some select items, like in the past, are EV buses. Took a long time to get there for those. We've got a couple and a couple more coming. We slowly move ahead. It's not we didn't buy 50 new buses, we bought 2, and then we found they worked and we added 2 more, and now we're adding more because for some routes they work very well, right? That's the process, and you all here get to vote on each and every one of those changes. So I hope you're comfortable having heard all that today. Those were some of the concerns that I had mentioned before. And the last point that I'm just going to mention is 2 things. One, we have to integrate these ideas into the daily work of the city, just like we do with other departments. It can't just be one person's job to do it. Some of it, as has been described, is the city's work, but it needs the concepts, the idea that we support this type of work as a community then gets integrated throughout the city. And that needs to happen, and it is happening, and hopefully it will continue to happen once we move past this.
And Mayor, can I just say, you mean city as the city-wide, not city organization? Yes.
Well, some will be city organizations, some will be citywide,
Yeah,
half
I
and
just
half,
heard the
roughly,
audience.
right? Yep, it's, they need to be adopted where the document shows that they will go. And also, the last reminder, just like every document that you ever approve or every policy you ever make, if it doesn't work or if things change and technology is changing so quickly, we may have to go back and modify a document. That's what the professional staff do. That's what we do. They bring it back, you discuss it, and it can change at a future time. So I don't think we need to be afraid that it's not perfect. It'll never be perfect. But if it speaks to the direction we want to move as a city and our hopes for our city, I think that's where we need to be today. And I would love for this to come back soon. And thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Norton. Councilmember Kirkpatrick?
Thank you. I really appreciate the time that you invested in this, all of you. I think I ticked you off, Mayor, when I said, no, I want to hear more, but this I believe really was the way to do it. So thank you for finding the time because yeah, this needed to happen before September. And I think you knew that I was always kind of 100% behind this anyway. And I appreciate the work of the commission that's been done on this. But to the point of going through it with a fine tooth comb, let's just take a look at slide 15 up on the screen here. The 3rd bullet point. Advocates for enhancement of existing neighborhoods. If we were truly acknowledging inclusivity, we would remove the word existing because we want neighborhoods all over this city. We're growing. We will have more neighborhoods in the future. The work that our neighbors does, hopefully we will empower more neighborhood associations to form. So this is what I was talking about when I wanted it to come back. I hope your work isn't done. I hope you'll go through it with a fine tooth comb, with that full inclusivity, with that full systems thinking about the growth that we're going to undergo and what direction that growth needs to take so that the next couple of generations can say, yeah, they did a good job. We have a really awesome place that we want to stay in and continue to grow and enjoy this space, this our little place on our planet. So that's it. Thank you very much. This has my approval. Just please use that fine tooth comb before it comes back as an RCA. Thank you.
I think everybody's had a chance to weigh in. I'll just say my colleagues have brought up a lot of good points. My main concern is that staff are able to do their work. Obviously, there's a process that our team goes through in evaluating each and every tactic and figuring out what's feasible at what time, what's no longer feasible because the context has changed. So my word choice is less exacting as my colleagues endorse, support, accept, whatever. But yes, we should accept the concepts within this, make sure staff have the flexibility and the endorsement or support or whatever to continue on evaluating the opportunities and moving this work forward. And it's a 5-year-old plan. So assuming that we will at some point go through another iteration of planning based on how many things have changed in the last 5 years. That's all I got. Anybody else? All right, thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Turn it over to Administrator Zalms to talk us through the study session schedule.
Council President, council members, Mayor Norton, we have an exciting study session coming up on August 12th. It is the bus tour, so be prepared for bus tour weather, for bus tour attire, and for that to be a little, potentially a little bit longer and more of an experiential meeting. We have been finalizing some of the different locations to make sure that you can do that in a concise amount of time, but have enough time in the different places to be able to actually experience that. So that's what's coming up August 12th. You have no meeting on the 5th Monday on the 29th of July.
All right, we're adjourned. Thanks so much, everyone.